Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about piggybacking a pistol red dot on top of your scope, okay, which is going to be at about 4.5 inches over your bore, okay. So normally when we put our red dot on top of a rifle, I tend to be 2 3/4 inches high. Sometimes people will be 2.5 inches high. I tend to be at 2 3/4. But now if we're going to have a scope and we're going to put a red dot on top of it, we're going to be at 4.5 inches high. So this is some interesting information that I was sent by one of my viewers, and I'm sure he's going to introduce himself down in the comments, and I'll pin his comments so that he can give you some additional information, right? Because what he did is he sent his research, his testing to me. I did invite him to make his own video, and I would have uploaded it on my channel, but he said that's not something he could have done. He just sent the data to me and asked me if I was interested to share this information with you guys, which I most certainly will, because I think it is extremely interesting. Okay, so what we're doing with the 4.5 height over bore, we're basically going to be using a 75-yard zero. Okay, now usually when people do this, they use a 100-yard zero. The problem with the 100-yard zero is that at 100 yards, it comes up, it kisses the line of sight, and then it starts dropping. Okay, so what this person has been experimenting with is using a 75-yard zero. Okay, and the reason is because by pulling it back to 75 yards, basically the bullet it hasn't reached its apex. Basically, it doesn't reach its apex until it is at 150 yards. And what that does is it allows us to get all the way out to 275 yards for our second zero. Okay, so instead of using a 100-yard zero where we come up, we kiss the line of sight at 100 yards, and then from there it's all downhill, he's pulling it back to 75 yards so that he gets a first zero 75 yards and a second zero at 275 yards. Now, you might, the first question is, why would you do that, right? If I got a variable scope here, or any type of a magnified scope, and let's say I'm piggybacking a red dot, the idea here is that, okay, this is at max magnification. At close distances, I'm using my red dot. Then I switch down to the scope for distance shooting. Then I switch up to my red dot, which is piggyback for close shooting. Well, the idea here might be is, and I'm just speculating, but let's say we're shooting a target close, let's say something at, like, I don't know, 30 yards. So we're using the red dot that's on top, boom, 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 boom. Then we see something, let's say out at 275 yards. And what we do is we switch out there and we use the red dot just to put like 2 shots out there, maybe some suppression fire, and then we go to our magnification scope and we look for the proper eye relief and the proper head placement, because that's one of the issues with using a magnification scope, right? You gotta have your head in the right position. So if you're shooting an awkward position, using the red dot might be faster, right? And then at the opportune time, you can get your head on the stock and find that eye relief and all that stuff. So again, I'm just coming up with a plausible reason why you would want to shoot the red dot that's on top of the scope at 275 yards when you have a magnification scope underneath it. Okay, so let's take a look at the data that I was provided. So again, if we're using a 100-yard zero, it'll come up, it'll kiss it, and then it's all downhill from there. So with the 75-yard zero, right, and this is using a 4.5-inch height over bore, right? This is with XM 193. What's happening is at 25 yards, we are negative 2.5 inches. Okay, so we start off at the muzzle being 4.5 inches low, right? Because your red dot's up here, 4.5 inches high. Barrel's down here, 4.5 inches low. So at the muzzle, you're gonna be 4.5 inches low. So if you're shooting somebody at the muzzle, basically you gotta put the dot like almost on top of the head so that you can hit them over here. Okay, so that's how that's gonna work with the 4.5-inch height of a bore. Now what's happening is line of sight is straight, so the barrel is pointed slightly up. so that the bullet comes up and intersects the line of sight. So as it's rising, right, as it's rising, by 25 yards, it will have risen so that we are now 2.5 inches below the line of sight. Okay, at 50 yards, we are 1 inch below line of sight. At 75 yards, we are at 0. At 100 yards, we are plus 1.5 inches, right? At 150 yards, we are 3 inches high. And at 275 yards, we have our second 0, okay? The question might become, well, normally when we think of a second 0 at 300 yards, we're typically using a 25-yard 0 or 36-yard 0. How's that working out? Well, the difference is the height over bore, right? Because normally we're only, I don't know, 2 3/4 inches high, right? Or 2.5 inches high. So if you're 25 yards or 36 yards, and there's a few factors that go into this, you know, bullet speed. But usually if your 0 is at 25 yards or 36 yards, your second 0 is going to be somewhere at, I don't know, somewhere between 275 and 300 yards. But because we have the 4.5 inch height over bore, it's going to shift things a little bit, so that with the 75-yard 0, you know, 75-yard 0, we're getting our second 0 at 275 yards. So I think that's really interesting. So as I look at this, right, the benefit of this is at 100 yards, right? Well, first of all the way out to 275 yards, the highest, well, at the muzzle, we're going to be 4.5 inches low, but usually, unless we're clearing out houses, we're not going to be shooting at the muzzle, right? So if you're at 25 yards, you're 2.5 inches low, right? And then at 150 yards, you're 3 inches high. So all the way out to basically 275 yards, and I would say all the way out to 300 yards, right? Because at 300 yards, it's just going to drop, I don't know, whatever, like 2 inches or whatever. So all the way out to 300 yards, you know, point of aim, point of impact with that red dot, you know, you don't have to adjust for holdovers, okay? Now, comparing this to he I guess uses a 2.5 inch height over bore on his regular ARs. I use 2.75. He uses 2.5. So just by comparison, when he's using the 2.5 height over bore at 25 yards, he's -1. At 50 yards, he's +1. At 75 yards, he's +2. At 100 yards, he's +3. 150 yards, +4. And then by the time he gets out to 275 yards, he's got his second 0. So that's with the 2.5 inch height over bore. The way it usually works for me is I use a 50-yard 0 usually. So I get my first 0 at 50 yards and my second 0 at 200 yards. I mean, that's what I typically use. So, you know, there's a number of things that can change this. One of the things that he mentions, and this is important, I probably should have mentioned this at the beginning, for this data that he has here with the 4.5 inch height over bore, he is using a 20-inch barrel, right? A 20-inch barrel. So if you're doing this with a 16-inch barrel, right? What he said is you're going to bring your 0 back by 10 yards. So instead of using a 75-yard 0, you're going to use a 65-yard 0. Okay. Actually, I kind of screwed this up over here. Hold on, let me fix this over here. Hold on for a second. Okay. So in case you guys want to take a screenshot of that, so we're going to 65 yards and then to 55 yards. All right, so I fixed that for you guys in case you want to take a screenshot. Little update error there. So if you have a 16-inch barrel, okay, what you're going to do is instead of having a 75-yard 0, you're going to use a 65-yard 0. So you're going to bring that 10 yards back, and then the rest of this data should line up. If you have a 10-inch barrel, you're going to bring that back basically another 10 yards or 20 yards from the 75. So you're going to use a 55-yard 0. So if you use a 55-yard 0, this data should line up for you like that. Okay, so that's with the 4.5 inch height over bore. So I thought this was extremely interesting. You know, I want to thank this person. Again, I don't remember his name. I have 2 names for him. because he was emailing me the data, and I was also talking to him in the YouTube comments. So that's why I'm having a hard time remembering his name. But I'm sure he'll sound off in the comments so you guys know who he is. So very, very interesting. Very interesting. I want to thank him for this research that he's done. So with the 4.5-inch height over bore, using the XM193, if you have a 20-inch barrel, 75 yards 0, at 25 yards negative 2.5, 50 yards negative 1, 75 yards first 0, 100 yards you're plus 1.5, 150 yards you're plus 3, 275 yards second 0. You know, as I'm looking at, if you notice I have an asterisk here. One of the things that I really like is because you're pretty flat, right? All the way out to 100 yards, you're very flat, and then you have the ability to get out to 150 yards, you know, with only being 3 inches high. So that's one of the things I really like about this, as opposed to like one of the reasons why I don't use a 25-yard 0 with my ARs when I have just a regular red dot on top of it with the 2 3/4-inch, 2 3/4 height over bore, is if I use a 25-yard 0, yeah, first 0 is at 25 yards, second 0 is at about 300 yards, but at 100 yards, I am 10 inches high, right? So 10 inches high, if I put the dot here, I'm over the head, right? So basically, I gotta get used to that. At 100 yards, I gotta put the dot at pretty much at the base of the neck in order to hit here. Because remember, a lot of times people, you know, bad guys would be hiding behind trees. So especially at close distances, this is all you get to see. And I've always thought that it is more important to be able to get on target fast and take quick shots without having to worry about holdovers or hold unders at closer distances, right? Because at closer distances, you know, you're under fire, you got less chance to think. If somebody's further out at 300 yards, I feel that, like, okay, I can get behind cover and I got more time to think about holdovers and stuff like that, right? 300 yards, 400, and 500 yards. But up to 200 yards, I want to be able to just get the dot on target, pull the trigger with like zero thinking. Okay, so that's